Das Kapital by Karl Marx. This is the complete book of Das Kapital, written by Karl Marx. This episode series presents the entire work in full. It is not a summary and not an audiobook, but the complete book itself. Episode 3, Section 3, The Form of Value or Exchange Value, Part 1.
The mystery of the value form. Marx begins this section by reminding us of what we've established. Commodities come into the world in the shape of use values, articles, or goods, such as iron, linen, corn, and so on. This is their plain, homely, bodily form. We can see and touch commodities, they're physical things. But they are, however, commodities only because they are something twofold, both objects of utility, and at the same time, depositories of value. So commodities have two forms. They manifest themselves therefore as commodities, or have the form of commodities, only insofar as they have two forms, a physical or natural form and a value form. We've talked about the physical form, now we need to understand the value form. And here's the problem Marx identifies. The reality of the value of commodities differs in this respect from Dame Quickly, that we don't know where to have it. Dame Quickly is a character from Shakespeare who people found elusive. Value is even more elusive. You can't point to it. You can't touch it. Marx explains, the value of commodities is the very opposite of the coarse materiality of their substance. Not an atom of matter enters into its composition. Turn and examine a single commodity by itself, as we will, yet insofar as it remains an object of value, it seems impossible to grasp it. Look at a coat as much as you want. You'll see cloth and buttons and stitching, but you won't see value. Where is the value? Value is social. Here's Marx's answer. If, however, we bear in mind that the value of commodities has a purely social reality, and that they acquire this reality only insofar as they are expressions or embodiments of one identical social substance, namely human labor, it follows, as a matter of course, that value can only manifest itself in the social relation of commodity to commodity. Value isn't a thing, it's a social relation. It exists only in the relationship between commodities. As Marx reminds us, in fact, we started from exchange value, or the exchange relation of commodities. In order to get at the value that lies hidden behind it, we must now return to this form under which value first appeared to us. We need to go back to exchange and examine it more carefully. The task. Explaining money. Marx sets out his goal. Everyone knows, if he knows nothing else, that commodities have a value form common to them all, and presenting a marked contrast with the varied bodily forms of their use values. I mean their money form. Everyone knows about money. Commodities express their value in money. But how did money come about? What is it really? Here, however, a task is set us, the performance of which has never yet even been attempted by bourgeois economy. The task of tracing the genesis of this money form, of developing the expression of value implied in the value relation of commodities, from its simplest, almost imperceptible outline to the dazzling money form. Marx is going to show us how money develops, step by step, from the simplest form of exchange. By doing this, we shall at the same time solve the riddle presented by money. The simplest value relation. Where do we start? The simplest value relation is evidently that of one commodity to some one other commodity of a different kind. Hence, the relation between the values of two commodities supplies us with the simplest expression of the value of a single commodity. Let's look at the exchange of just two commodities. This is the elementary form. The elementary form of value. Marx gives us the formula. X commodity, A equals Y commodity B, or X commodity A is worth Y commodity B. And a concrete example. 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat. This seems simple, but Marx warns us, the whole mystery of the form of value lies hidden in this elementary form. Its analysis, therefore, is our real difficulty. Everything we need to understand about how value expresses itself is contained in this simple equation. Let's unpack it. The two poles, relative and equivalent. Marx identifies the key structure. Here, two different kinds of commodities, in our example the linen and the coat, evidently play two different parts. The linen and the coat are doing different things in this equation. The linen expresses its value in the coat. The coat serves as the material in which that value is expressed. The former plays an active, the latter a passive part. The linen is active. It's expressing its value. The coat is passive. It's the material used to express that value. Marx gives us the terminology. The value of the linen is represented as relative value, or appears in relative form. The coat officiates as equivalent, or appears in equivalent form. Relative form and equivalent form. These are the two poles of the value expression. And here's something crucial. The relative form and the equivalent form are two intimately connected, mutually dependent, and inseparable elements of the expression of value. But at the same time, are mutually exclusive antagonistic extremes, that is, poles of the same expression. They need each other. You can't have one without the other. But they're opposites. They exclude each other. You can't express value in yourself. Marx explains why. It is not possible to express the value of linen in linen. 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen is no expression of value. If you say 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen, what have you said? Nothing. On the contrary, such an equation merely says that 20 yards of linen are nothing else than 20 yards of linen. A definite quantity of the use-value linen. It's just a tautology. 20 yards of linen is 20 yards of linen. You haven't expressed value at all. The value of the linen can therefore be expressed only relatively, that is, in some other commodity. You need another commodity to express value. The relative form of the value of the linen presupposes therefore the presence of some other commodity, here the coat, under the form of an equivalent. The positions are mutually exclusive, and here's the key. On the other hand, the commodity that figures as the equivalent cannot at the same time assume the relative form. That second commodity is not the one whose value is expressed. Its function is merely to serve as the material in which the value of the first commodity is expressed. The coat can't express its value while it's serving as the equivalent for the linen. It's doing a different job. Marx clarifies, no doubt the expression 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, implies the opposite relation. One coat equals 20 yards of linen, or one coat is worth 20 yards of linen. You can flip the equation, but, in that case, I must reverse the equation in order to express the value of the coat relatively, and so soon as I do that, the linen becomes the equivalent instead of the coat. When you flip it, the roles switch. A single commodity cannot therefore simultaneously assume in the same expression of value both forms. The very polarity of these forms makes them mutually exclusive. It's about position, not nature. Here's an important point. Whether then a commodity assumes the relative form or the opposite equivalent form depends entirely upon its accidental position in the expression of value. That is, upon whether it is the commodity whose value is being expressed or the commodity in which value is being expressed. It's not that the linen is naturally suited to the relative form and the coat to the equivalent form. It depends on their position in the equation. Either could play either role, depending on which value we're trying to express, the nature of the relative form. Now Marx digs deeper into what's happening in the relative form. He starts with a methodological point. In order to discover how the elementary expression of the value of a commodity lies hidden in the value relation of two commodities, we must in the first place consider the latter entirely apart from its quantitative aspect. Don't worry about the quantities yet. Forget about whether it's one coat or 20 coats. Focus on the qualitative relationship. The usual mode of procedure is generally the reverse, and in the value relation, nothing is seen but the proportion between definite quantities of two different sorts of commodities that are considered equal to each other. Most people just see the numbers, but that misses the deeper point. It is apt to be forgotten that the magnitudes of different things can be compared quantitatively only when those magnitudes are expressed in terms of the same unit. You can only compare quantities if they're measured in the same units. It is only as expressions of such a unit that they are of the same denomination and therefore commensurable. Linen equals coat. The basis of the equation. Marx makes the point. Whether 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or equals 20 coats, or equals X coats, that is, whether a given quantity of linen is worth few or many coats, every such statement implies that the linen and coats as magnitudes of value are expressions of the same unit things of the same kind. Linen equals coat is the basis of the equation. Before you can say how much linen equals how many coats, you have to establish that linen and coats are the same kind of thing as values. They're both expressions of the same substance. But the two commodities whose identity of quality is thus assumed do not play the same part. Even though they're being equated, they're playing different roles. It is only the value of the linen that is expressed. And how? By its reference to the coat as its equivalent, as something that can be exchanged for it. The linen is expressing its value by relating itself to the coat. The coat becomes value embodied. Here's the crucial insight. In this relation, the coat is the mode of existence of value, is value embodied, for only as such is it the same as the linen. The coat becomes value in physical form. It becomes the body that value takes on. On the other hand, the linen's own value comes to the front, receives independent expression. For it is only as being value that it is comparable with the coat as a thing of equal value, or exchangeable with the coat. By relating to the coat as its equivalent, the linen's value becomes visible, becomes expressed. The chemistry analogy. Marx gives us a brilliant analogy from chemistry. To borrow an illustration from chemistry, butyric acid is a different substance from propyl formate. Yet both are made up of the same chemical substances, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that too in like proportions, namely C4H8O2. Two different substances with the same chemical composition. If now we equate butyric acid to propyl formate, then in the first place, propyl formate would be, in this relation, merely a form of existence of C4H8O2, and in the second place, we should be stating that butyric acid also consists of C4H8O2. By equating them, we express what they have in common while ignoring their different physical forms. Therefore, by thus equating the two substances, expression would be given to their chemical composition, while their different physical forms would be neglected. Same with commodities. When we equate linen to coat, we're expressing what they have in common as values, while ignoring their different physical forms. Abstract labor becomes visible. Marx applies this to labor. If we say that, as values, commodities are mere congelations of human labor, we reduce them by our analysis, it is true, to the abstraction, value. But we ascribe to this value no form apart from their bodily form. When we just analyze commodities conceptually, value remains abstract. It is otherwise in the value relation of one commodity to another. Here, the one stands forth in its character of value by reason of its relation to the other. In the actual exchange relation, value takes on a form. By making the coat the equivalent of the linen, we equate the labor embodied in the former to that in the latter. We're saying the labor in the coat equals the labor in the linen. Now it is true that the tailoring, which makes the coat, is concrete labor of a different sort from the weaving which makes the linen. Tailoring and weaving are different. We established that. But the act of equating it to the weaving reduces the tailoring to that which is really equal in the two kinds of labor to their common character of human labor. By equating coat to linen, we're reducing tailoring and weaving to their common substance, abstract human labor. In this roundabout way, then, the fact is expressed that weaving also, insofar as it weaves value, has nothing to distinguish it from tailoring, and, consequently, is abstract human labor. The equation reveals that both weaving and tailoring are just forms of abstract human labor. Marx emphasizes, it is the expression of equivalence between different sorts of commodities that alone brings into relief the specific character of value-creating labor, and this it does by actually reducing the different varieties of labor embodied in the different kinds of commodities to their common quality of human labor in the abstract. The exchange relation is what makes abstract labor visible. Value needs objective existence, but there's more. There is, however, something else required beyond the expression of the specific character of the labor of which the value of the linen consists. Human labor power in motion, or human labor, creates value, but is not itself value. It becomes value only in its congealed state, when embodied in the form of some object. Labor creates value, but value has to exist in an object. In order to express the value of the linen as a congelation of human labor, that value must be expressed as having objective existence, as being a something materially different from the linen itself, and yet as something common to the linen and all other commodities. Value needs to appear as an object, but an object different from the linen itself. The problem is already solved. How? Through the equivalent form, the coat as value incarnate. When occupying the position of equivalent in the equation of value, the coat ranks qualitatively as the equal of the linen, as something of the same kind because it is value. The coat stands in for value itself. In this position, it is a thing in which we see nothing but value, or whose palpable bodily form represents value. The coat's physical body becomes the form in which value appears. Yet the coat itself, the body of the commodity coat, is a mere use value. A coat as such no more tells us it is value than does the first piece of linen we take hold of. On its own, a coat is just a coat. It doesn't announce that it's value. This shows that when placed in value relation to the linen, the coat signifies more than when out of that relation. Just as many a man strutting about in a gorgeous uniform counts for more than when in mufti. Great image. The coat in uniform, so to speak, counts for more than the coat in civilian clothes. Marx gives another analogy. In the production of the coat, human labor power, in the shape of tailoring, must have been actually expended. Human labor is therefore accumulated in it. In this aspect, the coat is a depository of value, but though worn to a thread, it does not let this fact show through. The coat contains value, but you can't see it just by looking. And as equivalent of the linen in the value equation, it exists under this aspect alone, counts therefore as embodied value, as a body that is value. In the equivalent position, the coat becomes value incarnate. Then Marx gives us a political analogy. A for instance cannot be your majesty to B, unless at the same time majesty in B's eyes assumes the bodily form of A, and what is more, with every new father of the people, changes its features, hair, and many other things besides. Majesty isn't a thing, it's a social relation. Someone is your majesty only if others treat them as such, and majesty takes on the physical form of whoever is king. Same with value and the equivalent, value form versus physical form. Marx summarizes. Hence, in the value equation, in which the coat is the equivalent of the linen, the coat officiates as the form of value. The value of the commodity linen is expressed by the bodily form of the commodity coat, the value of one by the use value of the other. The physical body of the coat becomes the value form of the linen. As a use value, the linen is something palpably different from the coat. As value, it is the same as the coat, and now has the appearance of a coat. As use values, linen and coat are totally different. As values, they're the same, and the linen's value appears in the form of a coat. Thus, the linen acquires a value form different from its physical form. The fact that it is value is made manifest by its equality with the coat, just as the sheep's nature of a Christian is shown in his resemblance to the Lamb of God. Another religious analogy. A Christian's spiritual nature is shown through their resemblance to Christ. The linen's value nature is shown through its equality with the coat. The language of commodities. Marx gets poetic here. We see, then, all that our analysis of the value of commodities has already told us, is told us by the linen itself, so soon as it comes into communication with another commodity, the coat. Only it betrays its thoughts in that language with which alone it is familiar, the language of commodities. The linen speaks to us, but in its own language, in order to tell us that its own value is created by labor in its abstract character of human labor. It says that the coat, insofar as it is worth as much as the linen, and therefore is value, consists of the same labor as the linen. The linen can't just say, I'm value, it has to show it by equating itself to the coat, in order to inform us that its sublime reality as value is not the same as its buckram body. It says that value has the appearance of a coat, and consequently that so far as the linen is value, it and the coat are as like as two peas. Value appears in a different form than the linen's physical body. It appears as a coat. Marx adds a linguistic note. We may here remark that the language of commodities has, besides Hebrew, many other more or less correct dialects. The German Wertsein to be worth, for instance, expresses in a less striking manner than the Romance verbs valere, valer, valoir, that the equating of commodity B to commodity A is commodity A's own mode of expressing its value. And he quotes the French saying, Paris vaut bien une messe. Paris is certainly worth a mass. The body as mirror. Marx gives us his final formulation. By means, therefore, of the value relation expressed in our equation, the bodily form of commodity B becomes the value form of commodity A, or the body of commodity B acts as a mirror to the value of commodity A. The coat's body becomes a mirror reflecting the linen's value. By putting itself in relation with commodity B, as value in propria persona, as the matter of which human labor is made up, the commodity A converts the value in use, B, into the substance in which to express its, A's, own value. The linen uses the coat's use value as the substance in which to express its own value. The value of A, thus expressed in the use value of B, has taken the form of relative value, and that's the relative form of value. Quantitative determination. Now Marx turns to the quantitative aspect. Every commodity, whose value it is intended to express, is a useful object of given quantity, as 15 bushels of corn or 100 pounds of coffee. And a given quantity of any commodity contains a definite quantity of human labor. Commodities exist in definite quantities and embody definite quantities of labor. The value form must therefore not only express value generally, but also value in definite quantity. Therefore, in the value relation of commodity A to commodity B, of the linen to the coat, not only is the latter, as value in general, made the equal in quality of the linen, but a definite quantity of coat, one coat, is made the equivalent of a definite quantity, 20 yards, of linen. The equation isn't just qualitative, it's quantitative. 20 yards of linen equals one coat. The equation, 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, implies that the same quantity of value substance, congealed labor, is embodied in both, that the two commodities have each cost the same amount of labor of the same quantity of labor time. They embody equal quantities of labor time. The labor time necessary for the production of 20 yards of linen, or one coat, varies with every change in the productiveness of weaving or tailoring. We have now to consider the influence of such changes on the quantitative aspect of the relative expression of value. What happens when productivity changes? 4 scenarios. Marx walks us through 4 scenarios. Scenario 1. Value of linen changes, coat stays. Constant. Let the value of the linen vary, that of the coat remaining constant. If, say in consequence of the exhaustion of flax-growing soil, the labor time necessary for the production of the linen be doubled, the value of the linen will also be doubled. It takes twice as long to make linen, so linen's value doubles. Instead of the equation, 20 yards of linen equals one coat, we should have 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats, since one coat would now contain only half the labor time embodied in 20 yards of linen. 20 yards of linen now equals 2 coats, because the linen is worth twice as much. If, on the other hand, in consequence, say, of improved looms, this labor time be reduced by 1/2, the value of the linen would fall by 1/2. Consequently, we should have 20 yards of linen equals 1/2 coat. With better productivity, linen takes half the time, so its value halves. The relative value of commodity A, that is, its value expressed in commodity B, rises and falls directly as the value of A, the value of B being supposed constant. When A's value changes and B's stays constant, the relative value moves directly with A's value. Scenario 2. Value of coat changes, linen stays constant. Let the value of the linen remain constant, while the value of the coat varies. If under these circumstances, in consequence, for instance, of a poor crop of wool, the labor time necessary for the production of a coat becomes doubled, we have, instead of 20 yards of linen equals one coat, 20 yards of linen equals 1/2 coat. The coat now takes twice as long to make, so it's worth twice as much. So 20 yards of linen, which hasn't changed, now equals only half a coat. If, on the other hand, the value of the coat sinks by 1/2, then 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats. If coats become easier to make, linen's relative value expressed in coats goes up. Hence, if the value of commodity A remain constant, its relative value expressed in commodity B rises and falls inversely as the value of B. When B changes and A stays constant, the relative value moves inversely with B's value. Comparing scenarios 1 and 2, Marx notes, if we compare the different cases in I and II, we see that the same change of magnitude in relative value may arise from totally opposite causes. You can get the same result from opposite causes. Thus, the equation 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat becomes 20 yards of linen equals 2 coats, either because the value of the linen has doubled or because the value of the coat has fallen by 1/2. Same equation, different reasons. And it becomes 20 yards of linen equals 1/2 coat either because the value of the linen has fallen by 1/2 or because the value of the coat has doubled. Scenario 3. Both change proportionally. Let the quantities of labor time respectively necessary for the production of the linen and the coat vary simultaneously in the same direction and in the same proportion. In this case, 20 yards of linen continue equal to 1 coat, however much their values may have altered. If both double in value, or both halve, the ratio stays the same. Their change of value is seen as soon as they are compared with a third commodity, whose value has remained constant. You'd only see the change by comparing to something else. If the values of all commodities rose or fell simultaneously and in the same proportion, their relative values would remain unaltered. Their real change of value would appear from the diminished or increased quantity of commodities produced in a given time. If everything changes proportionally, relative values don't change. You'd only see it in productivity changes. Scenario 4. Complex variations. The labor time respectively necessary for the production of the linen and the coat, and therefore the value of these commodities may simultaneously vary in the same direction, but at unequal rates or in opposite directions or in other ways. Things can change in complex ways. The effect of all these possible different variations on the relative value of a commodity may be deduced from the results of I to 2 and 3. The conclusion. Marx draws his conclusion. Thus, real changes in the magnitude of value are neither unequivocally nor exhaustively reflected in their relative expression, that is, in the equation expressing the magnitude of relative value. The relative value expression doesn't perfectly reflect real value changes. The relative value of a commodity may vary, although its value remains constant. Relative value can change, even if real value doesn't. Its relative value may remain constant, although its value varies. Relative value can stay the same, even if real value changes. And finally, simultaneous variations in the magnitude of value. And the text cuts off here, but Marx's point is clear. The relationship between real value and relative value is complex and not straightforward. What we've learned. This section has taken us deep into how value expresses itself. We've learned that value can only appear in the social relation between commodities. You can't see value by looking at a single commodity in isolation. In the simplest value expression, two commodities play two different roles, relative form and equivalent form. One expresses its value in the other. The one in equivalent form becomes the mirror, the body in which value appears. Through this relation, abstract human labor becomes visible. The equation of different commodities reveals that the different kinds of concrete labor are all just forms of abstract human labor. And we've seen how the quantitative expression of value responds to changes in productivity in complex ways. The same relative value can arise from opposite causes, and real changes in value don't always show up clearly in relative values. This elementary form is just the beginning. Marx will build from here to show how the value form develops through more complex forms until it culminates in the money form. but everything that follows is rooted in this simple equation. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat. The whole mystery of value, as Marx said, lies hidden in this elementary form.
Next, Episode 4, Section 3, The Form of Value or Exchange Value, Part 2. Join us in the next chapter as Marx's argument continues to unfold.